Alright, YouTube, the Occult Video 75 on low magic or more simple rites, as opposed to high or ceremonial or ritual magic. Here, Kitty, I'll help you down. Which is more elaborate, more complicated, it requires more preparation, more ritualism. You'd think of, for instance, the content of most Renaissance era works, or going back into the medieval era, where it's not strictly philosophical or essentially proto-chemistry. What you get are a lot of rituals that take a significant amount of preparation. That is, you have to consecrate the tools, you have to consecrate the clothes, you have to prepare by fasting and doing alms or praying certain prayers. You would have usually an invocation you would say at the outset, at the preparation, while you're drawing up your circle on the floor and doing all of those other things. And then you would say further incantations, and after all of this work is actually done, then you can get into the meat and bones of the spells. But wait, you also have to make sure that it's the right phase of the moon, the right time of the year, the right day of the week, and all of these other things, and it gets very complicated. It's more complex. Low magic is different from this sort of stuff. It's more of what you would think of as stereotypically Hollywood magic. That is, Gandalf says a few incantations and the rain comes, or the rain goes, or Saruman's power is blocked, or something like that. It's much more simplistic. This starts sort of in the Enlightenment period. Before that, much of it is higher magic, it's ceremonial, and it's also more philosophical. With the exception of a few tracts containing folkish rites from earlier time periods, and of course superstitions, which at the time were held by the literate classes to be vulgar, to be profane, possibly heretical, and generally don't seem to have been recorded in any great detail outside of historical context, and then you have to do a lot of digging to find only a few mentions of these things. As opposed to that, during the Enlightenment, but also into the pre-industrial and industrial era, you get a lot more of the non-ceremonial style of magic, where you have a few lines to say, you have a few simple invocations, you have a simple herbal poultice, you have things have been streamlined. There are more sort of spells or rituals or whatever you would call these things, and they're conglomerated together in many of these manuscripts and also within various folk traditions. These exist all over the world. You go to Africa, you would get sort of the authentic voodoo traditions. You would get some of the crossover colonial / native traditions in some of these cultures. You'd go to the Caribbean, you'd certainly find a lot of it. You've got the Appalachian tradition, you've got Mesoamerican groups in their own traditions. You've got the traditions of the Siberians, of the Hindi people of various sorts, of the people of Tibet, of literally every culture. It crosses national boundaries, it's everywhere. If you tried to compile all of the low magic, the more superstitious rites, you'd be writing so many volumes it would take you more than a lifetime to compile just those that were popular in any given century, let alone the entire span of time. In antiquity, though, sometimes it was more common than actually it was from sort of the beginning of the Dark Ages through the end of the Renaissance. For instance, in Greece, there's a system that was used. And I remember learning this from one of my professors in college in one of the religious courses that I was studying. The Greek system essentially was you identified a problem, asked yourself what it was, and then denied that you had the problem. For instance, you would say, my stomach hurts. How does my stomach hurt? Well, my stomach doesn't hurt. And you'd usually repeat this 3 times. 3 was an important number when performing this simple incantation, which is what it is. And this was done quite commonly. This was a common way of healing topical ailments, to sort of put them out of your mind. Again, in a psychological sense, you could say to externalize them, to forget about them. There was also the concept of writing sort of sacred scripts or incantations, usually in a triangular method, whether it be on a wax, a piece of melted wax on wood, or a stone tablet or a clay tablet or whatever. There was the tendency to draw these things up in a triangle. There's also the concept of taking a word and you delete the last letter in the word with each successive line and it forms a triangle or it forms some other shape. This is actually alluded to in the Pennsylvania Dutch tradition, within Homan's powwows. There are several talismans that are created in that form. That really it takes off of antiquity. Antiquity, you have more simple rites for the more profane, the more vulgar, the peasants or the middle class or whatever. They're performing these sort of things. The more elite individuals, the oracles, the lords, and so forth, they're performing more elaborate rites. And they didn't see anything wrong with the lower form of magic or ceremonialism, as it may be termed, in some of these cultures. Some did, some didn't. As you go through the Christian era, those lower rites are seen as explicitly evil or as nonsensical superstition, depending on which historical source you're consulting. In King James demonology, of course, these sort of folkish practices are condemned as a form of witchcraft. If you look at the Secret Book of the Black Arts, it lists, it's an 1800s era work, it lists 15th, 16th, and 17th century sources and what people said about witchcraft in more antiquated time periods during the Renaissance, essentially, and into the late medieval era, sort of the high Middle Ages, and sort of the feeling of various people about witchcraft. For instance, some said, well, some of these are just superstitious things, people are delusional, they're just peasants, they're illiterate, what can you do? But it's not witchcraft. Others say, yes, it is witchcraft. Some say, yeah, but you got to break it down between good and evil witchcraft. There are the black witches that they harm people, the white witches that actually are fighting the black witches, and then you got gray witches which kind of do both or neither. You have this classification scheme. Really what it is the Christian legalism, the doctrine of categorizing things into hierarchies and into subgroups in order to better regulate them, taken off of the legalistic Roman tradition. This is really what it's all about at the end of the day. But more low magic rites have made a comeback in the era, sort of post-Enlightenment era. It became more tolerated to perform such things. It was no longer seen explicitly as witchcraft, and even if it was, if the stated intent wasn't harm, or if harm was only done to a deserving party, here's how you stop a thief and cause them to get a rapid fever, they just start convulsing or something, then it was accepted. As early as the early 1800s, it becomes considerably more acceptable than it would have in the burning times to perform such rites. Again, you would think of a short incantation, a simple herbal remedy, a simple ceremony that requires relatively little preparation. You look at these things, typically you're gathering an herb or two herbs. You might create a talisman. It can be as simple as writing on a piece of paper that's worn around the neck or taken in the pocket. You've got simple fortune telling as opposed to more elaborate systems. I've seen this even within the oracle tradition, within the oracle and fortune telling literary tradition. If you go back to the 1790s with the Universal Fortune Teller of Miss Bridget, you've got an elaborate section. Half the work just deals with the minutiae of astrology, which is considered useful for fortune telling. You fast forward to the late 1800s, to the time of Tusi, or even the mid-1800s with Forty, and this is largely ignored. The only part of astrology which is still at work within the system at all is the simple 12 stages of the zodiac. None of the other celestial movements or lunar phases are mentioned at all, for the most part. In later works, even the mere mention of astrology is completely omitted. The hieroglyphical fortune teller, which is another work within this tradition that I'm editing now, actually omits it entirely as well. It's really a lot more like the early 1900s Napoleon's Oraculum, simply under a different title with different meanings to the different signs that can be cast by this system. And so low magic is far more simplistic. In the same amount of time that it would take a person to set up for just one of the more elaborate ceremonies of the Renaissance, hundreds and hundreds of shorter folkish rites could be performed. You may see this as people began to have less time to dedicate to superstitious things because of the dawn of industrialization or the dawn of modernity or whatever. And so they favored shorter, less elaborate rituals. That they cost less. That was important, of course. They were easier to understand, I think, number two. And number three, again, the amount of time actually needing to be dedicated to such rites is considerably less. There are advantages to keeping it simple within the occult. I will say my own preference within my own occult practice and study is for low magic, so-called. I appreciate the more elaborate ritualism, especially where it's bound together with philosophy. That's very good. But at the same time, as far as would I necessarily dedicate weeks or months of my life to setting up everything needed to practice any of these rituals, no. Whereas with low magic, if you're simply observing, for instance, the extent of low magic with regards to astrology is, oh, this spell only works on this day of the week. This spell only works at night, or something like that. That's really the extent of it. There aren't many limitations on the use. There are some arcane references. You know, you must take dew from nettles. It must be taken by a crossroads in the dead of night, and you can cure your eyesight with this. The idea of nettle dew, for some reason, is extremely connected with the eyes in virtually every type of literature where it appears in, surprisingly. I think I put a section about that in Fruits of Eden, but I might be wrong. I have to go back and revise it, make a second edition just to include a section on that. But, yeah, other than some of that sort of stuff, you know, the superstitious content, generally speaking, the low magic is pretty straightforward. It's just an incantation. It's just an herb that's being burned for a purpose. It's just a type of small, short prayer or a simplistic ritual. You know, get your wand. No, you don't have to consecrate it. No, it doesn't have to be any special kind of wood. Maybe witch hazel. Okay, that's fine. Or it's an ebony wand or something. Tap 3 times and say, you know, hoodoo voodoo or something like that. That's what low magic can consist of. All herbal workings, for the most part, would be low magic. That's another interest of mine. So I have a strong preference for it, I will say, generally over the more ceremonial rites within my own practice. And it's great. There's plenty of low magic sort of out there. The Petit Albert contains some, although it also contains more elaborate, specifically talismanic rituals in the style of the Black Pullet, sort of same French tradition, same general time period. There's a reason for that, I think, generally speaking, but also contains shorter, low magic rituals, especially herbal related ritualism. Holman's Powwows is almost entirely shorter ritualism. And there are other works like this as well. You could consider the Sword of Moses essentially to be low magic, because even though the preparation is more expansive, the spells themselves, as it were, are extremely short because they simply require writing certain divine words or names on certain objects and doing certain things with them for various effects. That's about all. Peace out.